You help business dads overcome their stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. How?
So, the first step, as always, is making sure that they have a vision, making sure that people know where they want to go. You need to have some direction. Otherwise, you're just kind of milling around in the pond. The next step is to have a look at people's values. Basically, are they doing the things that they want to live up to? And then lastly, ultimately, is that in line with their purpose and basically why they want to be around in such society? And that's really how we start that process. And then lots of other things come on in terms of my past experience working with professional sport, then working with high performing leaders. We kind of build this performance plan and picture together. So ultimately, they have an understanding of the decisions that they make from a day to day point of view and how that builds towards where they want to go in a
Love it.
nutshell.
Love that. Love that. So how about let's break some of those points down which kind of you talked about there. So creating a clear vision for success, and most importantly, I love this, is one that excites you. So when you're working with someone, and this would be great for our listeners as well, is to think about this approach. So what how do you help someone with creating a really clear vision and be really certain that they're going to be excited by it?
So there's a couple of markers of how that goes. So even in a conversation, I'm sure we've had discussions with people and you're like, they just have so much energy. They're so excited about what they're trying to do. And that feeds on to the people around them. And, if we were having this conversation, a simple one is like, does that excite you? Is that something that you believe is achievable? And with lots of people I work with, they don't necessarily play safe, but there doesn't seem to be this kind of right excitement to go get it. And one of the founding elements of when we set a vision, it's not just about where we see ourselves, it's really about where we hear ourselves, where we feel ourselves, and what emotions are we attaching to that. Because when things are not going well and motivation will wane or willpower, etc., making sure that where you are going to excites you is going to, you know, the old adage, does it make the boat go faster scenario is, are we working towards that? And having that clear conversation with somebody who's external to you is really important. And that's where it kind of all leads from.
Do you find that challenging to help someone get there? Do you think do people already have that clear vision, or do you feel that there's a bit of coaching involved and kind of conversations and kind of dig deep to go, what is it? Like what
Yeah.
is it that you're after, and what does good look like for you?
So I think a lot of the people that I speak to or come to me are driven by external things. I don't mean that in a negative way, but why do you want to, create a business that earns this or turnover, or why do you want to do that, or why do you want to get healthy, etc. And really, they're kind of at the top. They're obviously external. We have to drive a little bit deeper and understand why internally we want to do it, because when things are going wrong, that internal drive is, the one that's going to keep us going. And really, it comes back to, especially in professional sports, it's very easy for athletes to have a clear vision of where they want to get to, and we can start to process it right. Okay, so if we're looking to get to that vision, what are the steps? What are the goals? And how do we benchmark our way along the route? So then it's kind of we're looking at what we call periodization, where we're looking at what does the bigger picture look like, what does a smaller picture look like, and what does day to day look like, so that ultimately you make that decision, right? That leads on to the next decision, and we basically work through that. It can be quite challenging. People have to want to be willing to kind of have those conversations. And ultimately, the biggest question I ask a lot of people is like, what is influencing you into making this decision? And the scary thing is, if you think about how much of you is actually you, how much of your thought process or your conscious thinking is coming from the person inside, or is it, the interaction? So we've all kind of whatever time we're listening to this, will have had probably maybe some interactions. We'll have woke up in the morning, partners, spouse, kids, whatever it looks like, they will have fed back to you. They will have changed kind of the way that you think, listening to podcasts, reading books, looking at adverts, social media, they're all influencing the decisions that we make. And ultimately, it's trying to come back to, I'm doing all this hard work for something. Is it really what I want? And that can be a difficult conversation to have. But as soon as you come back and say, yeah, this is what I want, this is me, the motivation, the drive is just there. It's great to see.
You bring up a point there, which I think about a lot, which is intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
I write about it a little bit in the book. And I've had to go on a bit of a journey personally to really think about, like, these things. Are they the true things that I actually want? Or is it just because I saw a picture on Instagram and it looks great to sell this business for 10 million and then I'll be free, but you're never really there? So I think, can you just talk at that to a point there, because it's so relevant to think about, like, do I have interest, like, am I personally really truly motivated for this thing regardless of outcome? Or actually, is this extrinsic, which is it's an expectation someone else has got on me? Can you just break those down for us?
Yeah, so the easiest way I think is, if you look at when children play sport, it is truly intrinsic. They are just playing the sport just for the love of the game, and it all comes from inside them. They're not thinking about, earning millions of pounds, being a professional athlete. That comes later. And there's clear evidence that if we shift that, so if we encourage, especially younger people, to be more externally focused, at some point it will just stop. It won't be this kind of growing thing. So when we look at it, it's like, right, what drives you, what gets you going every day, regardless of whether you win, lose, draw, whatever that might look like. And when things are going well, it's easy, and when things are going not so well, what keeps you going? And if it's only external stuff, and the clearest evidence is that, if you sell that business for £10 million, what happens the day after? It looks like, for me, for example, especially working with professional athletes, they really struggle at the end of their careers because they've had this clear vision, they've had their values, they're with a group of people that have like-minded, they're kind of driving to this one goal. And then also alongside that, they have structure. You've got to turn up for training, this is what it looks like. And then exactly the same in business. Once you sell that £10 million business, it's like, well, what do I do the next day? And it can be a challenge for people. So I think that understanding, you need to have a mixture of both. You can't be all internally driven. We need to reach for things. We need to have a standard of living that helps us. But then if we switch and we go too external, and what I mean by that is, I've had conversations with C-suite CEOs, managing directors, people who externally, look as if they're doing well. But when you go down internally, they're just not very happy with where they are. And it's a difficult concept for them to remove themselves from that space, basically.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs often. And there was certainly a point in my career where, on the surface or from an external view, well done, you're at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But actually inside, I was in a lot of pain and suffering, and I often think about that, which is, you can achieve the thing, but you can still have pain and suffering inside. And I feel like there was a missing link in Maslow. As brilliant as it was, years ago when it was created, is it doesn't really think about, you can build the business, you can sell the business, you can do the thing, but you still be struggling. And I see that a lot, certainly in business. Where do you feel, you mentioned values, which is a really important word there. what can you just elaborate a bit more on values, why it's important, and how you set values and get values that are really true to you at the very beginning of your coaching journey?
Yeah, so the values piece kind of come around because ultimately I would go into different professional environments or different corporate environments, and you see their values written. They're on websites, they're sometimes in the office, in sports teams, they're kind of everywhere, change rooms, etc. And it really got me thinking about whether they are just words and how do you go about. So for example, if one of my values is honesty, how am I actioning that from a day-to-day point of view? What things am I doing to kind of align with those values? And then if you're not aligning with those values and you're mismatching your actions, there is some internal struggle that will go on, which ultimately takes energy away from you. It's that kind of scenario where, I've had people who've, yeah, one of my values is health, for example, and then you'd go into their fridge and it wouldn't look as if that was a matching kind of value. So there lines for me is, how are you aligning yourself with what you are doing, basically? And lots of that comes from, sometimes we have discussions about, what are your anti-values? What do you stand against completely, completely that will just not be acceptable for you? And with some companies, that can be the start of the issues in terms from a culture point of view.
That's interesting. I'm actually just trying to find something because I was very fortunate to go on a tour of the Emirates. And on the when I did a tour of the Emirates, they had these values up on the wall, and I was just trying to see if I can just find them again. Anyway, I'll find it as we come
And just on
as we
your point
chat.
there, there's I need to kind of find. There's a great book about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how actually he didn't really put it into that kind of hierarchy. And
No, there wasn't values weren't instilled in it.
yeah, so but what I really like is I can't think what the book is called, accusation, where you think of, instead of thinking of it as a triangle, think of it as a boat. So basically the boat is kind of your physiological needs, safety needs, and kind of your love and belonging. And then the top two are more sales, basically. So you need to have this boat all the time, but then you need sales to get your direction of where you want to travel to. I think that's really important because sometimes when people look at their needs, it's like, right, you've completed this level, now you're on to the next level, now you're on to the next level. But sometimes it's quite a good thing. I just like this whole idea of a boat that actually you're kind of chopping and changing kind of courses. And I see that, all the time in terms of people that I work with who are, they get to a point, whatever happens, whether it's trauma, burnout, poor relationships, whatever that kind of trigger point is, to think, right, how do I start to shift that direction? And it's like anything, if you're in a plane traveling, just that 1 degree shift can make a massive difference to where you're heading to, obviously along the lines.
It's interesting. Let's break down. So I've just found the Arsenal one, by the way. I'll read them out to you because I think it's going to be interesting, and then we can as a part of a conversation. So as you're walking out onto the pitch at the Emirates, this is the last thing it says. I'll share this later. It says, "Are non-negotiables." It says discipline, leadership, dominate, compete. So that's what it says that's the last thing the players see before they go out on the pitch. So
Yeah.
that's what they're thinking. So from a business perspective, and I suppose from a sports perspective, I imagine those are the words that are being instilled during training, in conversations: discipline, leadership, dominate, compete. So my question for you is, how do you translate that into a person when they're thinking about, because that's for a team or can be for a business, because obviously you have your values in the wall, but how does a person then start to think about what really matters to me in my life, and also how do I hold myself accountable to my own values?
Yeah. So obviously from that team point of view, they are kind of their values, their words. But from, let's just say, for example, leadership, right? So leadership, that's the one. In your own head, we all have a model of our leadership, our self leadership. So that might be, for example, how we speak to people, how we encourage people, how we kind of carry ourselves around from a day-to-day point of view. So just simple things, you know, the things that cost, that take no talent, in terms of effort, being on time, how we speak to people, all those different areas, and all those actions kind of feed into your leadership. And I think we go sometimes, especially sports wise, business wise, around leadership models, but actually what we're trying to think of is, what's our self leadership like? How do we kind of have our how do we guide ourselves to where we need to go? And that's what it looks like from a day-to-day point of view. Is I speak to people all the time, oh, I really want to be a good leader in business, but then when we kind of dig deep, how are you leading yourself? How are you treating yourself? Self-care kind of comes up all the time, but are you sleeping well? Are you exercising? What's the quality of your feeding yourself? How are you doing the things for you to ultimately reflect outwards?
Do you find a lot of the work has to go, and I call it back to basics, which is the foundations in some respects, where we're thinking about the self-care routines? Because I think if you're looking after yourself, you can turn up better for your family, for your teams, etc. So a lot of what when you first meet with people, is that part of the foundations that you need to ensure that are there?
Yeah, so it runs along lines. I use something called First Beat, which is a heart variability kind of score, which looks at how well a person's sleeping, how much stress are they under, what does their physical activity look like, really kind of basic things. Oh, well, I say basic, that's kind of to give them disservice. But if we think about it, there's only really big kind of 5 things that people, from a foundation point of view, and this is where wellness meets performance and performance is wellness. But really, we're looking at, how well you're sleeping, how well are you fueling yourself? So what nutrition are you putting into your body? How are you thinking from that perspective? And how are you breathing? And they're the big ones that kind of we all talk about all the time. And then obviously we put on top of that exercise and physical activity. And they're the big 5 that, if you look at all the wellness stuff, all come back to. And probably the best athletes I work with, probably the best leaders, etc., are people that do. There's a quote from a guy where it's basically, they do exceptional things unexceptionally well. In terms of, from that perspective, they are really good at. Sorry, it's the opposite, right? They do what we think as easy things really, really well all the time. So, for example, with athletes, people that would come in early in the morning into the gym, they know they need to do their mobility or their exercises to help with whatever it is. They're the people that come in every single day, and it might be only 10, 15 minutes, but they are there every single day concentrating on what they're doing. It, they're not paying it lip service, they're not mucking around, they are focused on what they need to do. And that's the same for people, is, how much sleep are you getting? Right. And here lies the kind of simple versus easy. It's simple to basically, to me, to say, right, Simon, you need to go to bed earlier. But how easy is that? We have families, we have work, we need to spend time with our partner, all that, we have hobbies, etc. And it gets a bit challenging from that perspective. But it's those simple things done really well, repeated over time, that leads to consistent performance and ultimately sustainable performance.
Let's go back to the point around values, because I love how this all integrates in some respects. And
Yeah.
and I think when you define your values, I've always kind of done this sort of thing, but I've kind of just written them down and gone, yeah, these are the things that matter. And then it's only until, I'd say, I started working my recent coach, where I've taken values, and now I hold myself accountable to live by those values. And I'll give an example. So my values are, and I try to keep them simple so it's easy: health, family, growth.
Yeah.
And then what I found recently was that over Christmas, so last year I went 10 months or so without drinking alcohol. And then at Christmas, I decided to have a few drinks here, and I was just kind of enjoying the Christmas spirit. I'll be honest, it made me feel terrible. So, and I thought, how is alcohol aligned to my health value? It just doesn't align. So I've just decided to stop drinking alcohol, period. And now I feel like I'm living. It's a hard thing to do and a hard thing mentally to think about, but it's kind of the one day at a time approach of, okay, I did a long time last year. I can probably keep going. It's no problem. You ultimately feel much better if you live aligned to your values. But let me turn this into a question for you, which is, how do you choose what's important? Like, it's because it's not, you've got your business, you've got all the things that you've talked about, all the distracting points. How do you get yourself focused on? And for the listeners, how do you choose? How do you get to those values, which is really, and again, this is maybe intrinsic.
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do it. One way is a simple value sheet. So there's like 110 values that you put in front of people, and you basically say, right, what are your top 20? What are your top five? And then ultimately, like, what are your biggest three? And we go through this process of really having a discussion. So you're saying to you is health, family, and growth. And I'd say, right, okay, so we've spoke about health, but let's just talk about growth. Right. So why is that important? Okay. And then people would say, right, okay. So then I'd say, right, how by you growing each day, how does that affect you? And then there'd be another thing. So it's very similar to the 5 levels of why. You keep asking why until you drill down into that bottom thing. I'm not a great fan of asking why, because I think it's quite challenging in terms of, right, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? Whereas from a coaching perspective, it's much more beneficial to pick what and how. People are more kind of thinking about, right, how by me doing this. So for you, for example, with health, instead of me saying, why is that important to you? Why is that important to you? So I'd say, right, by you being healthy, what would that achieve? Or how are you going to achieve that? And what would that sense? Once we get down to those 3, you could, then I say, right, okay, how are you actioning them from a day-to-day point of view? And then we have this kind of check and challenge scenario whereby, well, hold on, you're saying to me, health is really important. However, at Christmas, you went off and had a few drinks. Non-judgment, whether that's right or wrong. And so then it's check and challenge, check and challenge. And sometimes you'll get with people and you go all the way down that line and they're like, do you know what, actually, if I had to stand up in court and say, this is my value, I'm not sure that it is. Doesn't mean that it can't become the value. And also, if we dig a little bit deeper, if you start thinking, right, where do they come from? So some people with health, for example, might be the fact that they've had an issue with their health, and they're like, right, I don't want to go down that line. With their family, they've had an issue with their family, or whatever it looks like. That's how it looks, basically.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's where I kind of had my realization, which was, and also working with my coach, it was, these are also goals to move towards, because you can't achieve health, right? So really, I should say it's health and fitness, because I train and I lift and all those things, but it's about a direction that I'm moving towards. And I think that's where we've kind of landed at these values. And also, by the way, listen, it changes throughout your life. The values I had 10 years ago when I was a single man were different to what they are now as a married man with 2 children. So really, it's about these goals which you're moving towards, because every year I can state, this is going to be my healthiest year. This is going to be the year I get into best shape. And each year can grow and grow on that. And then the benefits of those, it improves the family, right? The better I am, the better the family is. That's so these goals need to work together, I think, in some respects. You also talk about purpose, and there's always a great conversation about purpose. What's your purpose? Have you found your purpose? Oh, I haven't found it yet. I'm still looking for my purpose. Or so how do you help? And you talk a little bit about helping people create purpose. Like how do you go on that journey with somebody?
I think first off, it's sometimes people, spend so much time trying to find their purpose, whereas actually it probably is right in front of them. They already kind of, if they listened or looked a bit deeper, they'd be able to find it. And what we're trying to look at there is, right, okay, so if we look at these as, overlapping things, and what you've been just talking about there, they're all overlapping. We're holistic in our nature. We're not just a single thing that we do daily. So as you rightly put, you being healthy helps you as a dad, helps with your family, then ultimately helps with your business. So there's kind of Simon in his with his bits and pieces. And then so around that, I would say is your overarching kind of purpose, basically. And what we try to do is get people to a stage where they're like, right, this is what I myself believe I'm here to do and how that looks like. And then everything kind of feeds from it. So if you look at that, then your values are part of that, your vision is part of that, how you treat yourself is also part of that. And we're trying to get people to a point where they kind of understand what's going on. Now, it won't come overnight, it might not come in a year, 5 years, but eventually, if you keep just checking in, eventually you're just going to get clearer and clearer and clearer. Very similar to a sculptor. Is just like you just keep chipping away, and eventually you'll get your statue, basically. And I think that's a big thing where some people are fortunate to just get their purpose straight away, or they just, right, I know what I want to do, that's me done, I'm very clear. Other of us is kind of bouncing around and trying to find out where it's at, basically. And I think for me, if you haven't, Ed Jackson, I don't know if you've heard of Ed Jackson. He was a professional rugby player. I was fortunate enough to coach him for a couple of seasons. He jumped into a pool and broke his neck and went from being a professional rugby player into, on a bed, not being able to move. And he's created this amazing charity called Millimeters to Mountains. And basically it's gone from him being able to pretty much, I think, move his toe like a millimeter or finger by his millimeter, all the way to getting back to climbing mountains, basically. And you can see how his purpose in that 1 second was completely reshaped. He went from being an elite athlete to where he was, and then that's grown into like this huge purpose and amazing charity, etc. And that's a prime example whereby sometimes it just happens, and that's great. But we have to have a bit of a understanding, especially if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this self-actualization, you've got to have that kind of conversation with yourself occasionally. That's okay.
Just reflecting on that story you've just told, I just can only imagine the dark moments that he would have had to have gone through. I wasn't familiar with that story.
Yeah.
To then create a positive outcome.
Yeah.
Were you coaching him through that journey, or
no? So he came to us, and then he went off, and then he wasn't with us. But really interesting is that kind of breeds into this kind of idea of experiential avoidance or experiential acceptance. So there seems to be a clear pathway whereby if something bad happens to us and we try to avoid it, then issues start to arise, basically. But if something happens to us and we accept it and we grow from it and we learn from it, there's huge positives that can come. Now, obviously with Ed's story, he has had something very unfortunate to happen, huge trauma, blah, 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 but he's kind of accepted it, and he's taken major growth, and he's going on to do some, he's written a book, I think he's on Netflix, and all for his charity, and he's taken that stuff amazingly away. But for me, if we drill down, and I'm not saying that all the people I work through have been through that, but what are you avoiding? What are you lying to yourself? What are you not willing to address? And that's where the really difficult work starts. And that's where it's really powerful, to think to yourself, right, okay, why am I reacting this way? And sometimes when we react, we focus on the person that we're reacting to, not actually what has caused them to really get at us. And that's a big thing, is that, it's not your boss that's the one, you focus all your attention on your boss, but actually, hold on a second, why am I reacting to that? And what opportunities do I have to better myself, to be able to take, this stress, this feedback, whatever it looks like? And that's quite powerful once you that idea of extreme ownership, and you start to take on board that you're kind of quite responsible for those things.
Brought up an interesting one there in stress. Whatever journey you go on, even if you have the clear vision, you have purpose and you're excited about it, no matter what journey you go on, there's going to be stress. So what strategies or recommendations or insights would you say that you can start to manage your stress a bit better?
So I think the first step is what you've just discussed there, is that actually there's a mind shift, a shift to think, because we all talk about stress. People, I'm so stressed, da, 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 da. And the majority of the people I work with, stress has got them to where they are. Stress is the thing that, makes you kind of focus on an exam, or, go for that interview or that promotion or start that business up. You've got to realize that that's got you to where it is. So it's not all negative. It's definitely an enhancing, a performance enhancer. If we think back to how we used to be hunter-gatherers, that stress is the thing that would save our lives. When we're stressed, we have a big cortisol release. It gives us energy, it gives us focus, it allows us to drill down onto one thing that we should be focusing on. Perfect. The issue comes from how we live now, is that we can start to perceive lots of things as we're always stressed, etc. So there's firstly that first step of like reframing that. How can I use this stress? And then second point of view is I talk a lot around stress tolerance and stress management. So stress tolerance, as you've just alluded to, you are developing your stress tolerance. So we know that people who are healthier can take more stress, who have good sleep, who get good recovery, can able to take more stress. We know that. So there's your tolerance, people who breathe correctly, all those great areas. The next is stress management. And so if we think about it, how are we dealing with stressful situations during the course of the day? So very simple, it's very similar to an athlete. For a stressful event, i.e. a game, whatever, we would warm up. We'd warm up for the game physically and psychologically. There's lots more around, right, the importance from a psychological point of view. And also we would finish this game and then there would be a recovery process. So one thing we spoke about especially is kind of, if we look at your day and your physiological response to your day, right, what are you doing to prepare yourself for these stressful events? And then you recognize that it has been stressful and you kind of do something to kind of down regulate that nervous system, to calm down. So, if you've just had a conflict with your colleague, or you've had a stressful meeting with a client, whatever that looks like, how do you just kind of remove yourself from that situation, just to take maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes to reset yourself and then go again, as opposed to just kind of flatlining and staying on. And then what happens is that when we do have that chance to recover, we've got so much kind of circulating stress hormones, thought processes, etc. We end up with this kind of wired but tired. People who are exhausted, but they can't actually fall asleep because they've got so much stuff kind of, they think it's all in their head, but there's actually lots from a physical point of view that's stored, and it's kind of trying to get people to take back that control, to take back that thing. Now, leaders can ultimately do a lot to help that. So, we have times of the day where we can work the best, and ideally what we're trying to get is for people to do their big important things, the things that are going to shift in those time periods. So most people's big times are kind of 9 to 11:30. So it really kind of says, right, okay, if you're a leader and it's not that urgent, let's try and push those meetings kind of more around the middle of the day, basically, instead of bombarding people with loads of stuff in the morning. And there's simple tools that you can start to do, to work through. And that's where kind of that looking at your day and getting a bit of a plan of like, right, how am I going to attack this? Or how are we going to kind of, get into that yin yang kind of scenario, basically.
You mentioned the stress is in your body.
Yeah.
And you mentioned somehow finding a way to release it. Now, you finish a hard day and then you've got the kids at home,
Yeah.
and you've gone from one level of organized chaos to another way of organized chaos by going home. Are there any tactics or ways of releasing that stress relatively quickly, or and I
Yeah.
don't know, I'm thinking journaling, meditation, walking, I don't know, that there's the sorts of things I do. I don't know whether there's any things that you recommend or processes, so therefore you recover quickly and then you can kind of progress.
So on that note, it's amazing when we look at people's stress response that their biggest stress response is in the evening, especially if
Yes.
they've got kids and family.
Yeah, mine certainly is. Yeah.
It's just like, it's, I wouldn't say it's easier, but obviously when you've got young children, etc., to try and get them all this stuff, and also you're fatigued, so that kind of adds to it. But one way is for sure is to create some space. There seems to be, from the evidence and point of view, is that you know work from home has its benefits, but there's huge benefits from being in an office and then commuting, whether that's driving in your car on your own or sitting on a train or bike or walk. It just gives you a bit of breathing space to kind of think to yourself, right, okay, what's happened in the day has happened. You maybe do a bit of reflection, think to yourself, right, okay, and then it gives you that opportunity then to think, right, okay, that's that part of the day done, and then I step into a new role as husband, wife, partner, whatever it is. And there's clear evidence to give yourself some space and time. You touched on some there, as it's journaling, mindfulness, meditation, going for a walk, exercise, whatever that looks like. You need to find the one that kind of helps you the most, because what's really interesting, especially when we look at professional sports, so if we look at recovery, so normally what would happen is after some tough session, especially in rugby, we might do some cold therapy, some ice baths, etc., etc. And it's really interesting that there's lots of players that hate it. They hate it so much. And you would be like, look, just get in the ice bath, just get in the ice bath. And it got to a point where they hate it so much that they wouldn't be able to kind of it would get them more stressed because they were like, oh, I hate this so much. So what we would start to do is individualize their recovery. So, okay, yeah, fair enough. You don't want to do it. Right. Go on a bike, do 20 minutes spin of your legs, and then do some stretching. That's your recovery done, or whatever it might look like. Okay. Or do some stretching. Yeah. So we got into that idea of kind of trying to individualize it. And that's what we need to do is you need to find that way. And you need to, what I do think is that there's two things. People don't try different ways, and also they don't try those ways for long enough. So as part of doing a presentation the other day, and we were talking a little bit about negative thoughts and self, and this individual stood up and said, look, I've tried meditation, it just doesn't work. And I was like, right, okay, how long have you tried it for? And he's like, oh, probably 6 weeks in total. This person's 37 years old. So I was like, right, so you've been not necessarily thinking this way, but you've had all these thoughts for 36 and a half years. 6 weeks is not going to stop you, unfortunately. You have to be consistent going through and monitoring it. I think that's what people need to think about is like, right, how do I find what works for me? Is it journaling? Is it writing? Is it breathing? Is it walking? Whatever it looks like, and see how it affects you. And that's where, again, the first beat stuff, the physiological data is quite cool because you can say, right, okay, look, we tried that. That seemed to have worked. Let's continue to do that. Or you do it and then you just ask yourself, right, do I feel less stressed now? Or you kind of self-assess yourself.
I think a lot about mental resilience, and you're kind of beginning to build into that, which is the impact mental resilience has on peak performance, because you can build your mental resilience to deal with more stress, to deal with more people, to deal with more things, to deal with more stuff happening, essentially. How would you recommend that people start to build their mental resilience? Because you've started touching on it just there, which is you've got to have different plans, different strategies for people. When I was 6 weeks into meditation, by the way, it wasn't going so well for me. And actually I ended up doing a 7-week course, which is around positive psychology. I went into doing that course for a different reason. But what came out of it was, suddenly meditation and flow state clicked. suddenly I felt better with who I was and where I was in my life. And then meditation started clicking, then journaling started clicking, then walking started clicking. I was like, oh, hang on, this is all building lovely together. This is great. Like, this is the best time. This is the best I've ever felt. And I come back to the positive psychology course, and the mental resilience was built during that time. So yes, my question for you come back to is that how, for someone who's trying to build peak performance, what impact does mental resilience play, and how can someone build on it?
So again, I think it is we have to be one connected person. Okay, so when we talk about mental resilience, there's obviously ultimately physically there's stuff that we can do. So going to the gym, for example, or running or biking or swimming or whatever, it's improving our physical capacity, but it's also improving our mental capacity. How many people do you see who do ultras, etc., and they just say, oh, mentally it was so challenging mentally. The physical aspect, is the thing that will go, and we just need to keep working. So there's a whole wealth of stuff there whereby if you are healthier, fitter, sleeping, etc., mental resilience is going to be in there. The next point is how are you challenging yourself to improve your mental resilience? So if I was to drop, for example, loads of stress onto somebody, that might be too much. Okay, but how do you find little ways to push yourself in an environment that allows you to step back? Let's say, for example, you were scared to go outside. Okay, what we wouldn't do is I wouldn't go, hey Simon, shove you out the door, slam the door behind you, and hope that you'll be all right. Okay, what we would do is we'd open the door for 10 seconds one day, 20 seconds. Right, can we take a step out? Can we step? And we'd slowly build back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. And that is a great way to you think yourself, right, okay, ultimately, why or how or what benefit is it for you to improve your mental resilience? Okay, well, that's the benefit, right? Okay, so I know that I've got that vision of me having this, right? What steps can we put in place to get you where you need to be? And I love to, people talk about mental health. I really talk about mental fitness, because we have a better understanding that if Simon stops going to the gym or if he stops running, his fitness is going to get worse. And that's the same with mental health, is that if you stop doing the things that support this mental resilience, this mental health, you're going to get into a point where, and I think sometimes we only really think about mental health when things are going wrong, or mental resilience when we're really struggling. Well, hold on a second. Why are we not proactive, preparing ourselves? Because we know that life's not going to be this straight, nice, linear line. We know that, unfortunately, there's going to be trauma. Things are going to go wrong. Business, personal life, friends, family, whatever it is. To make sure that we're in the best place to be able to determine that. And so I think, we all, what's the saying that, everybody wants change, but nobody wants to make that change. Sometimes it's too easy to just stay still and static. You need to start thinking yourself. And it's not this whole adage of, better never stops, or this whole kind of elite professionalism. It's just doing it, because what your journey has told you is that I could never have said to you, hey, Simon, if you do this, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, because you'd have been like, that doesn't sound great. But if you said, right, look, that journey of your self-exploration, that process that you've been through, people can take kind of like, right, okay, yeah, I'm really struggling. What's the one thing that you can do to help that today? And that will lead on. It's just this domino effect of doing things time and time again.
I remember when I was doing the course, it was something that really resonated with me as I was trying to learn about mental resilience and kind of step into this for the first time, was your mind is a muscle. Because I've understood going to the gym. I've been training for years, decades. So I understand that. Like you do chest, you do squats, you do deadlifts, you do those sorts of things. You're building your muscles. I never once thought about your mind as a muscle. And that statement alone made me realize, well, oh, okay, hang on. So I can build my muscle. I can build my mind as a muscle to become stronger, more resilient. So, and I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, when I worked for a particular leader who would send out quite aggressive emails, that would really trigger me for whatever reason. And I had to go on my own journey to find out why, which I've understood later. But that would trigger me, and that would turn into a weekend of drinking, alcohol, self-destruction, right? Because I couldn't. But that was also my mindset, which was let's go off and party and everything else, which was like slam the laptop down, we're off. But now, if a similar instance like that happens, it's just like I feel sorry for the person who sent the email. I'm like, oh, I suddenly now have an empathy towards that person. Yeah, it might affect me a tiny bit. I might go for a walk and just go, okay, but I'll actually just think about it. And that's the bit of growth, which is it doesn't affect you anymore. You just crack on. Like, and what my coach often talks to me a lot about, which is just how quickly do you respond? Well, years ago, it would take me 4 days to respond and plus a week because I would have a hangover. Now it's just, okay, bit of an email was sent. I wonder what's going on with them. I have some empathy, go for a walk. Let's think about the situation. Don't respond today. And that's like the bits of growth, which is you don't always realize until you reflect. And that's the bit I was hoping to chat to you about, is a little bit about reflection. Where does reflection come into all of this for you, where you're kind of thinking about who you were, who you've become? How powerful, how important is reflection?
So there's two things there. One is reflection, and so you've just talked about it. There's stimulus and response. It's how we are a human being that gets a stimulus, and then we figure out a way to respond. And the best way that we can obviously do it is to give us time between that stimulus and response. That basically ultimately gives our rational brain a bit more time to kick in. You know, I'm sure you've seen it all before, and you've probably maybe been involved where somebody said something to you and you've reacted pretty quickly. Emotional brain kicks in, powerful, strong. Then their emotional brain kicks in, and before you know it, you're close to kind of beating the rubbish out of each other. Whereas if I said something and then you had a bit more time to kind of look at it, that perspective, to come into my shoes, see what maybe I'm going through, you know, from an empathy point of view, and then that is what is the best thing. And we are built on a kind of a society where stimulus response is happening all day, and to give yourself a little bit of time and space and just reflect on what's going on, and that's more internal stuff. And for me, how my kind of journey come around was, I suppose, so I'm dyslexic. You know, I went to school when there wasn't really understanding knowledge around this, just got labelled as thick, as lazy, never do this, never make that, laughed at, teachers, all that type of stuff, probably from the age of, well, when we started doing spelling tests, so probably from the age of 10 all the way through to getting into university, and to get into my second year of university. And one of the lecturers was like, you have to stop. You know, I think you're dyslexic just looking at this. I've seen it all before. Go get an assessment. Let's see what's happened. And so, yeah, all come back. Now, what happened from that point is that there was a huge desire for me to achieve, to prove all these people wrong, to go to my teacher, oh, look, you know, I've got a degree, I've got a master's, whatever. And so there was always this kind of external drive for me to do something to show them that, to prove them wrong. And so you go on this journey where you're like, right, you look back and you're just, okay, you try to empathize, you know, maybe they just didn't know what was going on. Maybe they just didn't have the training. Maybe they were under stress. Maybe things in their life was going through it. So that kind of acceptance of what's happening. And ultimately, right, well, this has happened, but this has fostered my drive for knowledge, my kind of want to learn, my growth patterns, all this type of stuff. It helps me to emphasize with, you know, the people that I speak to, that, you know, people I coach or whatever that looks like. So huge positives come from this negative that took me probably until I was, what, I'd say maybe 15, 16 years ago. Wow. Where a very prominent coach come to me and he said, look, you know, great coaching, technically amazing, but you need to kind of have a bit of a think about you and yourself. And then that started this whole process of, going back, and it's quite difficult. It's horrible work to do, to go back and, become that individual and relive those horrendous times, but ultimately in a safe environment. And that's more kind of therapy work, etc., etc. But for me, I think that's so powerful for people to do. And I'm not saying we go on that journey, but I'm saying that, you hear it all the time and you're like, where's that coming from? And for people to stop and not get caught up and not do what you did in a negative way, but when you were, partying or whatever, we see it all the time, is you are just kind of distracting yourself from what's going on. That's all you're doing. You're just delaying it because at some point it's going to come around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's amazing, especially the alcohol journey, how many more people you see on social media who are like, I'm not drinking anymore. It kind of, I thought it was for a social thing, but actually it was to help me to kind of get away, etc., etc. I think that's hugely powerful for people out there to just think, right, okay, when I'm taking these actions, are they me, or are they, my mate saying, right, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, because we want to be, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to be social. We want to have a tribe around us, basically.
Sounds like you went through a very painful process, having to revisit everything that happened during those years, which was obviously challenging. How did you approach that? Like how did you approach going back into such a painful time? And you mentioned therapy there. I've done a fair bit of therapy as well, and I had to not undo, it wasn't even undo. It was about understanding the things that had happened when I was younger, which, by the way, nothing major has ever really happened to me significantly, but things still happen.
Yeah.
Like there are still things, right? And what was your approach to understanding what had happened for you to then change the narrative for your future?
So I think the big thing for me, which it was from a feedback point of view. So whenever any kind of feedback came, I took that hugely personal. It really got me emotionally. It got me upset. And however it was delivered, whether it was delivered in the best way ever or horrendous way, whatever it looked like, I always had this massive, huge kind of guttural, emotional reaction. And for me, I was like, why does that keep happening? What's going on? What's the benefit of me reacting to that? And I think to myself, that was hugely powerful for me to kind of say, well, hold on a second, I need to kind of figure out where that comes from. And if I think about it now, if I go back to there, obviously I'd hate that kind of having to, to say how many spellings I got right that week, or having to stand up and people. And I was just like, I just wanted to shield myself away from this kind of feedback or any criticism for anything. And that was kind of the trigger for me to say, right, I need to do that. I need to kind of do this work. And you're right, it's not great. It doesn't feel good. Emotionals come back, but it's kind of that, right? It's that healing process that we all go through. And especially as a dad, the one thing that I don't want to do is not be lazy or not do the work to enable me to be the best dad that I can be. And also to, encourage my children that, there's going to be tough times. The world is not sunshine and showers, and it's a tough world to be in. You need to prepare yourself for what's going to happen. And that's all that we try to do as parents. And for me personally, that's all I try to do.
I think it sounds like you needed to go on that journey of the healing through therapy to understand what happened, relive some of the pain, to become further more aware, for you to be able to soothe that pain, but then find your own peak performance. Would you say that was about right?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't. Peak performance is a really interesting one, because I think that peak performance only works in certain environments. So in a sports environment, it's perfect because we've got a game on Saturday, so we're doing all this prep for this one-off peak. in the business terms, I just don't. It's more kind of sustainable high performance, or high performance is the way to go. So for me in this journey, and when I talk about high performance, it's not just it's that whole kind of holistic process. And I think the awareness piece, I was talking to a friend at the weekend, gets kind of diluted. We all talk about self-aware. Oh, yeah, I've got to be self-aware, blah, 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 emotional intelligence. But actually, it's the first step in this, So I'm not putting words into your mouth. It was like that positive psychology was the first step to this journey of like, right, let's go from it. Or however it kind of comes about, you've just got to take that first step on that journey. And ultimately, some people that work with me or come to me, you know, they're not there. They're not willing to take that first step. They're like, right, no, I've come here because, you know, I want to get fitter, or I want to earn more money, or the business needs to do this. And you got to pull them back in. And if it's not right for them, it's not right for them. You only can do what you can do, basically.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for people doing that piece of work because I've done that piece of work now and it was extremely painful. I saw different people, different therapists. I did some of the Marissa Peer RTT therapy as well. So there's a whole, and it's all different types of therapy. And that I found as I've learned more about myself, I've become more healed, and therefore it's allowed me to just become the person that I've always wanted to become. So, and I wouldn't have become that person, this person who I am as I am today, without going through that process. So I would continue to numb myself with drinking, and I didn't even identify with the word numb. I just thought I was a party guy. And I'm like, but I did that for decades. And and I see a lot of people, especially in leadership positions in business today, we're high stakes. We're talking about millions in revenue often. And I just think it'd be great if you all did some healing. Quite often, I'm in those business situations, which is, it'd be great if you all meditated. It'd be great if we could just calm down a bit, because we can all speak to each other in a calm and reasonable way and actually get the job done better. So I'm always a really big advocate for go and do the hard yards on your own in private, and to find out what's holding you personally back from turning up and being your best self. But it's not just for you; it's for your team, it's for the people around you. Because I think, and last couple of questions for you, but I'd love to take your perspective on. I buy into a calm leadership culture. So when people are calm, I'm calm, my team's calm. Right, even if things aren't going in the way that we want to. And how can leadership more take the stress out of that, that moment? So therefore, do you think, is stress in any way a good thing for leadership? What's the best place for leadership to be able to drive businesses forward?
So it's a really interesting kind of point, because we touched on it before, is that if I have an emotional reaction, you're more likely to have an emotional reaction back to me. So if we think from a leadership point of view, I'm sure we've come across leaders that are purely emotional, and that's where, if people think it's getting too much from, we say, look, remove yourself from the environment, take yourself out. What does that look like? And so there has to be this kind of element of whereby leaders can take on, they take on stress for the people around them. They are, in theory, the people that are driving, they've got their clear vision, they're trying to bring people along. Ultimately, what has to happen is those leaders need somewhere to go off and to de-stress. And if they don't do that, then that kind of pulls its head out of the parapet. That's where it goes wrong. And ultimately, especially with kind of entrepreneurs or people that have companies, that own companies, that can be a big, big challenge, because I'm taking all this stress on, I'm the leader, I'm the owner, whatever. Then I go home and I don't want to, lay that out onto my family, and so they're stressed there, and all it's coming from both ends. And it's like, right, where's this going to pop? So again, you have to pull yourself out and you have to kind of go off and find that place. But as a leader, one of the big jobs that we need to do is to get to understand the people in our team. So some people love this calm atmosphere. They want us to be calm. Da da da. There might be some people in your team that are like, right, actually, they work best when they are put under pressure. When we're not obviously driving until they fall over, but there might be those types of people that love that. But that's fine. That's okay. We know that if we give them the stress, then we have to create some time. The challenge comes from, especially, in big corporates, there's just constant stress all the time. We would play a game on a Saturday, we'd have a recovery day on a Sunday. First thing Monday morning would be either some light exercises, but there would be a review of what's just gone on every time. In business, it doesn't really happen like that. You finish a massive project, right, onto the next thing. No one really says, right, Simon, you've done really well. Next couple of days, chill out, have a bit of a review of what's going on. 9 times out of 10, you're probably already working on the next thing, the next project, the next sales lead, the next thing. And 5, 10, 15 years can go past really quickly if that's how you're doing it. So I think that leaders ultimately need that kind of litmus test of what's going on around them and who they need to know. Because I know players who would be, right, calm, let's speak to them in this way, you need to do this, this and this. And then other players who are like, right, they need to be kind of more vocal about what's going to happen and more aggressive to a certain degree.
Lee, I've truly loved talking to you today. You certainly shared some insights and strategies that I can certainly take into my life. Where can people find out a little bit more about yourself so they can, if they choose to, they can engage, they can become kind of more of a high performing individual, or they can level up their game, they can elevate their game, they can become more present for their family, support their family? Like where can people find out more about themselves?
So probably LinkedIn is the main place where I kind of hang out. So just my name is as the profile, and that's kind of got all the details of where people can come and find me, engage, and drop me a message.
That sounds great. All right, Lee, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise.